you are dealing with linear thinkers in a non-linear universe. Well, just take $3 billion and we'll buy some cars from ourselves. After all, we own GM and Chrysler. The Soviets did that. They did. It was called circular production. We'll guess at what to make. We'll make a bunch of ball bearings. We'll send them, they won't fit. We'll melt them down, and then we'll make ball bearings. Brilliant. When I was in the Army, we went to East Berlin. And it was in 1988 before the wall came down, and there was somebody physically standing in a booth changing the stoplights. Is that your vision of full employment? I think not. So cash for clunkers, $3 billion. And you sell 3 weeks worth of cars. Only one of the top 10 cars, the Ford Focus, was American. General Motors and Chrysler, sales declined in the month they launched it and the month afterward. Those 3 weeks worth of car sales, if you look at the marginal difference between the clunkers that were turned in and the fuel savings of the cars that were purchased, according to the Wall Street Journal in August, the savings in fuel was equivalent to 22 seconds of fuel consumption in the United States. Oh, that makes sense. From an accounting standpoint, you had a liability. Oh yeah, if you weren't laughing, you'd be crying. From an accounting standpoint, you had an asset that was paid for, an asset, right? A car that was paid for. And now you have what? A liability with payments for 5 years, 60 payments. Did the insurance of the individuals that own the car go up or down? And the license fees, did they go up or down? Okay. And this makes sense according to what? Well, everybody should own a home, right? March of 2005, take as much debt as you want. You don't get 100 because if the mortgage broker sells it in 60 days, you can borrow up to 110% of your house. Lovely. And you've distorted the structure of production. What's happened? The dealers are screaming for cars, and the OEMs are saying, no, it's a one-off. We can't make any decisions based on the fact that the government just shot a bunch of money and said, go buy cars from yourself. So that's cash for clunkers, okay? Oh, and they're touting the program. That's success. Yeah, right. Number 2, $787 billion stimulus package. Ooh. If you do the math, it's frightening. If you take the promise of 3 million jobs created, divide it into $787 billion, it's $262,000 a job. Does that make sense? No. I love it. You guys are great.
Convert you can get it, right?
That's right. It's good for everybody that has a job like that. And their excuse? Well, the $150 billion that the Bush administration tried in April of last year didn't work. So they think it's like cooking in the kitchen. More is better. We'll just do more? Yes, by all means, just do. Ethanol. In a drought-stricken, water-needed West, it takes, depending on the source, 600 gallons to 1,400 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of ethanol. And ethanol is about 85% as efficient as regular gas, so it takes more to do the same thing. You've distorted corn production throughout the world, oversupply here, driving prices in the third world down, making more angry people hungrier, more prone to terrorism. It skews incentive and development, and you've messed up the engineering process. How many billions of dollars went into engineering to develop engines that can burn corn? And on my way to work, I only know of one station that sells E85. The people that brought you ethanol now want to bring you health care. Don't forget that. It's very important. Oh, don't worry, we'll fix it. Professor Breiser mentioned small companies and smaller management and pushing things downward. When General Grant became the Commander-in-Chief of the Union Army in 1864, he was in charge of 533,000 Union troops. His staff, an officer corps of 14 men, equivalent to the size of an officer corps for a U.S. division. He wrote handwritten notes, and he trusted people, and General Sherman said, "You never doubted what Grant wanted." Since you are new centurions, I will give you a scripture passage about an old centurion that you can look up. We professors love to get homework. But it's only a paragraph. It begins on Matthew 8, verse 5. Read it well. Understand the promise, heed the warning. We'll publish a book in November called Spread the Wealth. It's an educated response to the madness of our time. I'd appreciate your support, and the mission of this book is to give you something to take to Congress other than a tea bag. Thank you very much.
What would you do to change the way the country is looking right now, as far as like from the government and also an economical standpoint?
Thank you. The first thing I would do would be to remove the Social Security portion of FICA taxes for both employees and employers. This was discussed in February of last year in the Bush administration. They didn't act on it. It would give the country a 6.2% tax break to both individuals and businesses. I would require the federal government to either sell assets or cut expenses to make up for the shortfall in income. The cut would have to be at least a year. Would be the first thing I would do. The second is I would make the federal unemployment rate match the national unemployment rate. It's asinine to be hiring people and expanding government at a time where civilians are losing their jobs. Government does not create wealth. Wealth is created by the private sector. So those would be the first two things I would do. Third, I would work on more free trade. I know individuals hate to hear this in a union state, but when you look at major corporations failing, you can look at Bethlehem Steel in 2002. They had 12,000 people on the floor supporting more than 100,000 dependents and retirees. The Big Three is the same way. So Bethlehem Steel was the warning. GM and Chrysler is another warning. And Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare are the third warning. Again, Pearl Harbor, Custer, Challenger, Columbia. You must heed the warnings and you must act on information. So cut expenses, I would do that FICA cut. I'd keep the Medicare portion though, because that system's under strain. They only do projected budget shortfalls for 5 years on Medicaid. Social Security, Medicare, they can do it out in perpetuity. Yes, sir.
You started your lecture this evening about acting on information.
Yes.
That's been a common theme about what you've been talking about.
Yes.
And when the example that popped in my mind was the Iraq War. Now,
Right.
the president gets this threat report every morning. It passes through so many hands, a lot of people. Finally gets to him. He acted on the information. The information turned to be wrong.
Correct.
So what would you do to correct that situation?
Iraq? I don't think we have enough time for me to answer your question. It's very difficult. It's not our country, and we invaded under false pretenses, and now we're there, and if you leave en masse, like we're planning to do next year, you risk that country going into thirds, with the Shia, the Sunni, and the Kurds in the north. The traffic in the Kurdish section with respect to commerce, they generally have their own currency, is north-south. It's almost like Canada in the western part of the country. Most of the commerce in Saskatchewan, British Columbia is north-south with the United States. A lot of the eastern portion of Canada is east-west. So, I mean, the Kurds are in a tough spot. But Iraq it's very difficult, and I unfortunately don't have an answer for that. Afghanistan is larger surface area than Iraq. And they just put the Stryker Brigade from Fort Lewis and a brigade of Marines in there, 10,000 troops. I'd submit to you, if you want to stay and actually win, you need at least an Army Corps, which is several $100,000 for at least a decade. It'll cost trillions, but you just put $10 trillion into the financial system, you've got not much to show for it except short-term stability. We'll just do one more question.